The Mediterranean stretched dark beneath Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Tucker as he braced himself in the doorway of the C-47. It was 10 p.m., July 11, 1943. The transport's engines roared steadily, carrying the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment toward Sicily's southern shore. Everything had gone according to plan during the flight from Tunisia. The formation held tight. Inside, paratroopers sat weighted with 70 pounds of gear, ready for what should have been a textbook jump. Then hell opened up below them. Tracers spiraled upward like deadly fireflies. 40-millimeter shells burst orange against the black sky. The Mediterranean itself seemed to erupt with thunder as every gun in the Allied fleet turned skyward. They were firing at Tucker's planes, at American aircraft, at their own forces. In the lead transport, a radio operator's voice cracked with desperation over the frequency. "We are American paratroopers. Stop firing. Stop firing." The message went out on the correct channel, but coordination had collapsed. Most ships never got word about the airborne operation. Their gunners had just survived German bomber attacks 15 minutes earlier. They saw silhouettes. They fired. The slaughter unfolded with terrible speed. Transports exploded mid-flight, becoming fireballs that tumbled toward the sea. Others, riddled with shells, fought to stay airborne as engines died and wings shredded. Some pilots aimed for shore. Others attempted water landings. Few made it. Inside dying aircraft, paratroopers faced an impossible choice: jump into the sea with equipment that would drag them under, or ride the burning plane down. Some jumped anyway, splashing into the Mediterranean in full combat load. The weight pulled them down into darkness. A few managed to cut free and swim. Most didn't surface. Those who jumped over land descended into a nightmare of their own. Anti-aircraft gunners on the beaches tracked them as they floated down, unable to distinguish friend from foe. They opened fire on men hanging defenseless beneath their canopies. Paratroopers died in the air from bullets meant to protect them. Within 20 minutes, 23 C-47s had been destroyed. 37 more took damage, so severe they'd never fly combat again. 81 men died outright. 318 more were wounded. Among the dead, Brigadier General Charles Kieran's, Assistant Division Commander. Senior leadership cut down by friendly fire. Tucker's plane survived the gauntlet. He landed with his remaining men and fought through the night. But when dawn broke over Sicily, as he stood watching rescue boats pull bodies from the water, watching medics work frantically over the wounded, watching dog tags collected from the dead, he made himself a promise. Never again. Not on his watch. Not to his men. Not to any American soldier. What Tucker couldn't know was that this catastrophic night would spark the most successful aircraft identification system in military history. A solution so simple ground crews could apply it in hours. So distinctive gunners could recognize it in seconds. So effective it would save hundreds of aircraft and thousands of lives during the largest invasion ever attempted. The transformation wouldn't come from sophisticated radar or complex electronics. It would come from the most basic tools imaginable: paintbrushes, black paint, white paint, and desperate determination to ensure Allied forces would never again slaughter their own. The tragedy had been building for months. Since early 1943, Allied planners understood that invading Nazi-occupied Europe would require unprecedented air superiority. Thousands of aircraft would fill the skies simultaneously: fighters, bombers, transports, gliders, reconnaissance planes, all operating in the same airspace, all vulnerable to the same terrible mistake. The existing identification system looked adequate on paper. American planes carried white stars on blue circles. British aircraft bore red, white, and blue roundels. These markings worked fine when operations involved dozens of planes. But Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of France, would involve over 13,000 Allied aircraft in the initial assault alone. Electronic Identification Friend, or FOE, IFF, was supposed to prevent friendly fire. Radio transponders received interrogation signals from the ground and transmitted friendly responses. In theory, Every Allied aircraft would identify itself electronically to every anti-aircraft battery and every fighter pilot. In practice, the system had critical limitations. Lieutenant Commander William McGarry understood these limitations better than most. Commanding the USS Jeffers, a destroyer escort assigned to protect the Sicily invasion fleet, he'd requested specialized aircraft recognition training for his crew. The Navy ran a school in Columbus, Ohio specifically for this purpose, the Renshaw course, using innovative techniques to train gunners to identify aircraft silhouettes in fractions of a second. Ensign Donald McClure, 25 years old, completed the Renshaw course in early 1943. He joined the Jeffers in Norfolk on June 5. For 34 days until the ship sailed for Sicily on July 9, McClure drilled every officer and crew member on aircraft recognition. Every single day. Multiple sessions. No exceptions. The discipline proved critical. On the night of July 11th, when C-47s appeared over the invasion fleet, most ships opened fire immediately. The Jeffers didn't. McGarry's crew recognized the aircraft silhouettes. Despite the chaos, despite the darkness, despite having just survived German bomber attacks, the Jeffers was one of the few ships that held fire. But the Jeffers was the exception. Most ships lacked the Renshaw training. Most crews operated on raw nerves after days of combat. Just 15 minutes before the C-47s arrived, German Junkers 88 bombers had attacked the fleet. The Ju-88 had a twin-engine configuration similar to the C-47. In darkness, under stress, with adrenaline coursing through exhausted bodies, the distinction became impossible. The official Army history described it with brutal honesty. The slow-flying, majestic columns of aircraft were like sitting ducks. Dozens were hit. One exploded mid-air. Others, on fire, tried ditching in the sea. Squadrons broke apart, tried reforming, scattered again. 8 pilots turned back to Tunisia with their paratroopers still aboard, unable to penetrate the wall of fire. Major General Matthew Ridgway, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, watched the disaster from a ship off Sicily's coast. He'd expressed concerns before the operation launched. Naval commanders told him they couldn't guarantee his aircraft safety. They'd actually said those words. Ridgway had been promised all ships would be informed about the paratrooper transports passing overhead. Many ship commanders later insisted they never received those orders. The investigation identified multiple failures. Ground commanders hadn't adequately alerted troops about the airborne mission. Paratroopers and infantry used different passwords, creating confusion. The C-47s carried yellow recognition lights on their bellies, but gunners either didn't see them or didn't recognize their significance. Communication between services had broken down at every level. But the fundamental problem was simpler and more intractable. Human beings under extreme stress cannot reliably identify aircraft by silhouette alone. Not in darkness. Not when recently attacked. Not when hesitation might mean death. Fire discipline, no matter how well trained, collapses when bombs are falling and ships are sinking. Ridgway understood this reality. In his report written in August 1943, he acknowledged the deplorable loss of life, but also wrote something prophetic. I believe that the lessons now learned could have been driven home in no other way, and that these lessons provide a sound basis for the belief that recurrences can be avoided. The lessons were learned immediately. 2 months later, on September 9, 1943, American troops invaded mainland Italy at Salerno. Within 4 days, German counterattacks threatened the beachhead. Lieutenant General Mark Clark called for the 82nd Airborne as emergency reinforcements. Ridgway had one condition: rigid control of anti-aircraft fire is absolutely essential. This time, Clark listened. He personally ordered all anti-aircraft batteries, ships and shore, to hold fire from 9 p.m. until further notice. Clark met face-to-face with naval and ground commanders. He sent representatives to deliver orders in person to every single unit. The C-47s flew a route skirting the invasion fleet. When the 504th jumped shortly before midnight on September 13th, not a single shot was fired at them. Not one. The success vindicated Ridgway's insistence. It demonstrated that friendly fire could be prevented with proper communication and discipline. But it required perfect coordination, perfect timing, perfect execution. One breakdown anywhere in the chain and soldiers died. Meanwhile, the solution was already being tested, though few realized its significance. In late 1942, the Royal Air Force faced a different identification problem that seemed unrelated to Sicily, but would prove crucial to solving it. The new Hawker Typhoon fighter had entered service as a low-altitude interceptor designed to counter German hit-and-run raids. Fast, 412 miles per hour at low altitude. Heavily armed with four 20mm cannons. Perfectly suited for defending Britain's southern coast against Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bombers. It also looked almost exactly like the Focke-Wulf 190 from certain angles. The resemblance was uncanny and deadly. Allied anti-aircraft gunners shot down multiple Typhoons in the first months of operations. Exact numbers were never officially recorded, but squadron records document dozens of incidents. RAF pilots, exhausted from combat missions over occupied France, would cross the English coast and suddenly find themselves under fire from their own defenses. The similarity wasn't superficial. Both aircraft had large chin-mounted radiators for liquid-cooled engines. Similar dimensions and wing configurations. Similar inline engines with distinctive cowlings. Both operated at low altitude where recognition was most difficult. Both approached from the same direction, crossing the English Channel from occupied France. In the split second available for a firing decision, with an aircraft closing at 400 miles per hour, the difference was effectively invisible. Pilots complained bitterly. Ground gunners defended their actions. Hesitation could mean a German bomber reached its target. RAF leadership recognized the problem, but struggled to find a solution. Standard aircraft recognition training emphasized silhouette identification. Gunners learned to distinguish aircraft by engine number, wing configuration, tail shape. But those distinctions required time and clear visibility. In combat conditions, with seconds to react, training often failed. The RAF tried several solutions. They painted the Typhoon's nose completely white, creating a distinctive marking visible from any angle. This helped, but wasn't sufficient. Gunners still hesitated. Pilots still died. Finally, in December 1942, the RAF implemented something new: high-visibility black and white stripes on the underside of Typhoon wings. Simple alternating bands of black and white, each approximately 12 inches wide, extending across the full wingspan. From the ground, the pattern was unmistakable. No German aircraft carried such markings. The stripes could be seen at distance and identified instantly. The solution worked. Friendly fire incidents involving Typhoons dropped dramatically. The success didn't go unnoticed. RAF planners filed reports on the wing stripes' effectiveness. The system was noted as a precursor to possible future identification schemes. But in early 1943, no one imagined applying such markings to thousands of aircraft simultaneously. The logistics alone seemed impossible. Then Sicily happened. Then Salerno. Then the magnitude of Operation Overlord began to emerge. Allied planners projected that on D-Day alone, over 14,000 aircraft sorties would be flown over the invasion beaches. Fighters providing air cover. Medium bombers attacking coastal defenses. Light bombers supporting ground troops. Transport planes dropping paratroopers. Gliders landing infantry. Photo reconnaissance aircraft documenting the assault. Air-sea rescue planes ready to retrieve downed pilots. All in the same airspace. Many flying at low altitude within range of naval anti-aircraft guns. The invasion fleet would include thousands of ships, many equipped with automatic weapons designed to fire at any approaching aircraft. Ship crews would be under attack from German aircraft. Exhausted, stressed, frightened. The conditions would be identical to Sicily, but multiplied by a factor of 10. In March 1944, a study group examined the problem in detail. They calculated how many IFF interrogation signals would be transmitted simultaneously during the invasion. They modeled how many aircraft would be within range of each transmitter. They analyzed the IFF system's capacity to handle multiple simultaneous responses. The conclusion was unambiguous. The IFF system would be saturated and fail. The existing technology couldn't handle the volume of aircraft. Electronic identification would break down precisely when most needed. Friendly fire incidents weren't just possible. They were inevitable. Hundreds of aircraft would be shot down by Allied guns unless a new solution was found. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory commanded the Allied Expeditionary Air Force, Supreme Air Commander for Operation Overlord. Every aircraft involved in the invasion reported to him. The responsibility for preventing another, Sicily, fell directly on his shoulders. Leigh-Mallory reviewed the study group's findings. He consulted his staff. He examined the RAF's experience with Typhoon wing stripes. He made a decision that would save thousands of lives. On May 17, 1944, 20 days before D-Day, Leigh-Mallory approved a revolutionary marking scheme. All Allied aircraft participating in Operation Overlord would be painted with alternating black and white stripes. Not just on wings. On both wings and fuselage. 5 stripes total. 3 white, 2 black, arranged in an unmistakable pattern. The specifications were precise. On single-engine aircraft, each stripe would be 18 inches wide. On twin-engine aircraft, 24 inches wide. The stripes would wrap around the fuselage just forward of the tail section. They'd cover the wings front to back, top and bottom. Every aircraft that might fly over Allied anti-aircraft defenses would carry these markings. Fighters, light bombers, medium bombers, transports, gliders, photo reconnaissance aircraft, air-sea rescue planes, even coastal command aircraft, whose duties might bring them over the invasion fleet. The order specifically exempted heavy 4-engine bombers, the B-17s and B-24s of the U.S. 8th Air Force, the Lancasters of RAF Bomber Command. These aircraft had distinctive silhouettes that couldn't be confused with German bombers. The Luftwaffe operated few heavy bombers. An Allied gunner seeing a 4-engine bomber could safely assume it was friendly. But every other aircraft required the stripes. The scale of the operation was staggering. Thousands of aircraft needed painting. Ground crews were already working around the clock preparing planes for invasion. Maintenance schedules were packed. Spare time didn't exist. Now they need to mask off roundels and serial numbers, mix hundreds of gallons of paint, and apply stripes to thousands of aircraft, all without disrupting combat operations. The security implications were equally challenging. If German intelligence learned about the invasion stripes, they could paint similar markings on their own aircraft. The entire system would collapse. Worse, the timing of stripe painting would signal when invasion was imminent. Every intelligence officer in occupied Europe was watching for signs of Allied preparations. Suddenly painting every aircraft in Britain would be an unmistakable indicator. Leigh-Mallory made another critical decision. Stripe painting wouldn't begin until the last possible moment. The order would be held at the highest classification level. No aircraft would be painted until D-Day was imminent. When the order came, it would be executed immediately. Within hours, not days. Security and speed were both essential. On June 1, 1944, a small test flight was conducted. A handful of aircraft, already painted with invasion stripes, flew over the assembled Operation Overlord fleet. The exercise was designed to familiarize ship crews with the new markings. Sailors and gunners watched as striped aircraft passed overhead. They were told these markings indicated friendly aircraft. Any plane without stripes was to be considered hostile. The rule was simple. If it doesn't have stripes, shoot it down. The test flight served another purpose, validating that stripes were visible at the distances and altitudes where identification decisions had to be made. The black and white patterns stood out dramatically against the sky, easier to see than standard roundels, distinctive enough that no confusion was possible. The test confirmed what the RAF learned with Typhoons. Simple visual markings, properly designed, were more effective than complex electronics. But the test flight involved only a few aircraft. The real challenge lay ahead. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower had tentatively scheduled D-Day for June 5th, weather forced postponement to June 6th. That delay gave ground crews one additional precious day, but also meant the window for painting was closing. On the evening of June 3, 1944, the order finally came down through official channels. All troop carrier units were to paint invasion stripes immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. Every C-47 transport. Every glider tug. Every aircraft that would drop paratroopers or tow gliders on D-Day. The paratroopers were scheduled to jump in the hours after midnight on June 6th. The aircraft had to be painted before takeoff. Ground crews had approximately 48 hours to complete the work. On June 4th, the order went to fighter and bomber squadrons across Britain. Every P-51 Mustang. Every P-47 Thunderbolt. Every P-38 Lightning. Every Spitfire, Typhoon, and Tempest. Every B-26 Marauder and A-20 Invader. Every Mosquito photo reconnaissance aircraft. Every air-sea rescue plane. Thousands of aircraft. All to be painted in less than 48 hours. The scale was unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever been attempted. Ground crews scrambled. Paint supplies, carefully stockpiled in secret for weeks, were distributed to squadrons across England. 5-gallon cans of black. 5-gallon cans of white. Brushes of all sizes. Rollers for large surfaces. Masking tape to protect roundels and serial numbers. Written instructions on stripe width and placement. Diagrams showing proper application. Warnings about keeping national markings visible. The supplies arrived in trucks that drove through the night, headlights masked, following roads memorized in daylight. The work began immediately. Ground crews who'd worked all day maintaining aircraft, loading ammunition, fueling tanks, returned to flight lines for another shift. This time carrying paint instead of tools. They set up portable lights around each aircraft. Measured and marked with chalk, applied masking tape along the lines, opened paint cans, and began the painstaking work of transforming thousands of aircraft. The physical labor was exhausting. Each aircraft required gallons of paint. Wings alone needed coverage from leading edge to trailing edge, top and bottom. Fuselages needed complete wrapping from cockpit back to tail. Paint had to be applied thick enough to be visible, but not so thick it added excessive weight. Crews worked in teams, some on ladders, some on scaffolds, some lying on wings. They painted in darkness, in cold, in wind. They worked until their arms ached and their backs screamed. Then they kept working. At RAF Leiston in Suffolk, ground crews worked through the night of June 4th painting P-51 Mustangs of the 357 Fighter Group. Captain Clarence "Bud" Anderson was a veteran pilot with months of combat experience. When he walked to his aircraft on the morning of June 5th, he stopped in astonishment. Alternating 18-inch wide bands, 3 white, 2 black, covered his Mustang's wings and fuselage. Anderson couldn't believe how large they were. The stripes dominated the aircraft's appearance. Every other marking seemed insignificant by comparison. He'd been told ground crews would paint special markings overnight. He'd expected something subtle. What he saw was anything but subtle. Across Britain, the same scene repeated at hundreds of airfields. Pilots arriving for dawn briefings found their aircraft transformed. Familiar camouflage patterns interrupted by stark black and white stripes. Some paint jobs were neat and precise, others hasty and rough. Ground crews had worked under intense time pressure. In many cases, they had only hours to complete the work. Some aircraft flew on D-Day with paint still wet. The logistics were extraordinary. Thousands of gallons of paint consumed in less than 48 hours. Post-war reports claimed that most of the black and white paint in Britain was exhausted. Whether literally true or not, the statement captured the scale. Every airfield needed supplies. Every squadron needed manpower. The work continued day and night. Some squadrons discovered they didn't have enough paint. They improvised, mixing whatever black and white they could find. Some used whitewash. Some used gloss. Some used flat. The resulting stripes varied in appearance, but the pattern was consistent. 3 white stripes, 2 black, alternating, unmistakable. The weather delay that postponed D-Day from June 5th to June 6th proved critical. Ground crews gained 1 additional day. Squadrons that wouldn't have finished in time completed their painting. Aircraft that would have flown with partial stripes flew with full coverage. The postponement that frustrated commanders probably saved dozens of aircraft from friendly fire. At midnight on June 6, 1944, Operation Neptune, the air component of Operation Overlord, began. 23,400 Allied airborne troops loaded into transports and gliders at airfields across southern England. 822 aircraft carrying paratroopers toward Normandy. Hundreds more towed gliders loaded with infantry, artillery, jeeps, supplies. All bore invasion stripes. All were unmistakable as they passed over the invasion fleet assembling in the English Channel. Paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions would jump first, securing the western flank. British 6th Airborne Division would secure the eastern flank. The drops would begin at 12:16 a.m., 5.5 hours before amphibious landings. The aircraft would fly over the most heavily defended invasion fleet ever assembled. 6,000 ships, tens of thousands of anti-aircraft guns, crews that had been at battle stations for days. Nerves stretched to breaking. Ships of the Allied naval force watched the Armada pass overhead. Gunners who'd been briefed about invasion stripes saw the black and white patterns clearly against the night sky, even in darkness, even through clouds. The contrast was visible. Even under stress, with hands on triggers, with adrenaline surging, the identification was certain. The aircraft were friendly. Hold fire, hold fire, hold fire. The discipline held throughout the fleet. Unlike Sicily, where panic and confusion triggered massacre, the protocols worked. Naval officers enforced fire discipline. Gunners followed orders. The identification system functioned exactly as designed. The transport planes were not fired upon by their own forces. The paratroopers were not shot while hanging from their parachutes. The airborne assault succeeded without the catastrophic friendly fire losses that had plagued Sicily. The invasion stripes worked exactly as intended in their first real test. At dawn, as amphibious forces approached beaches designated Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, the sky filled with aircraft. Wave after wave of fighters providing combat air patrol. Squadrons of medium bombers attacking coastal defenses. Light bombers supporting troops as they fought inland. Photo reconnaissance planes documenting the assault. All bearing invasion stripes. All unmistakably Allied. All protected by the simplest of identification systems. The Luftwaffe response was remarkably weak. German fighters had been relocated from France to Germany to defend against strategic bombing. Allied intelligence estimated Germany had planned to have 5,000 aircraft available to prevent invasion. By June 6, 1944, the German Air Force had been fought off its feet. Luftwaffe 3, responsible for defending western France, had just 319 serviceable planes facing nearly 13,000 Allied aircraft. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe flew 1 sortie for every 37 flown by the Allies. Only a dozen German fighter bombers reached the invasion zone. 10 dropped bombs prematurely and fled. The most famous Luftwaffe appearance was made by 2 pilots, Ace Joseph Pips Priller and his wingman Heinz Wuderzik. According to legend, both were hung over from partying the night before. They made a single strafing run over the beaches, drawing thousands of rounds of return fire, then disappeared. German soldiers on the ground later joked bitterly. If you see gray planes, they're American. If you see black planes, they're British. If you see no planes at all, they're German. The joke captured reality. Allied air supremacy was total. The invasion stripes were barely tested by enemy action because there was no enemy action to speak of. But the stripes were tested by the one threat planners feared most. Friendly fire from confused, exhausted, frightened gunners who fire first and ask questions later. That threat, which had killed 81 men over Sicily, was neutralized. As D-Day unfolded, friendly fire incidents involving aircraft were remarkably few. The simple paint scheme accomplished what complex electronics couldn't. Not everyone believed the stripes were necessary. Some argued that Allied air supremacy made them redundant. If German aircraft barely appeared, why worry about identification? The response from those who'd been at Sicily was immediate and angry. The stripes weren't insurance against German deception. They were insurance against human error. They were designed to prevent Allied forces from killing Allied forces. That threat didn't disappear just because the Luftwaffe was weak. The stripes also served a psychological function. Soldiers on beaches, pinned down by German fire, looked up and saw striped aircraft overhead. Unmistakably friendly. Unmistakably there to support them. The sight was reassuring. It reinforced the message that Allied air power dominated the battlefield. It reminded frightened men they weren't alone. For pilots, the stripes provided confidence. They knew that as they flew low over invasion beaches, as they strafed German positions, as they attacked coastal defenses, their own forces wouldn't mistake them for enemies. They could focus on their mission without worrying about friendly fire. That psychological edge translated into more effective combat operations. The success of invasion stripes was so complete that planners initially left them in place. For the first month after D-Day, all aircraft retained full markings. But by mid-July, a problem emerged. The stripes on top of wings and fuselages made aircraft highly visible from above. Parked on forward airfields in Normandy, striped planes stood out dramatically. They were easy targets for any German aircraft that managed to penetrate Allied air cover. On July 7, 1944, orders went out to remove stripes from upper surfaces of wings. The top of fuselages could also be repainted in normal camouflage, but undersides had to retain the stripes. Aircraft were still flying over Allied positions. Naval guns were still a threat. The identification system had to remain in place. By December 1944, the tactical situation had changed. Allied forces had broken out of Normandy. They were advancing across France toward Germany. The dense concentration of aircraft over a small beachhead no longer existed. The risk of friendly fire had decreased. On December 27, 1944, orders went out to remove all invasion stripes. Aircraft could return to standard markings. But the stripes had already entered history. Photographs from D-Day showing Allied aircraft with their distinctive black and white bands became iconic images of the invasion. The markings symbolized the unprecedented scale of the operation. They represented the coordination required to put 13,000 aircraft over the beaches. They demonstrated that even the largest military operation in history depended on simple solutions to complex problems. The statistical evidence supported the system's effectiveness. On D-Day, 11,590 Allied aircraft flew 14,674 sorties. Of those, 127 planes were lost. The loss rate was less than 1%. Most losses were from German anti-aircraft fire or mechanical failure. Friendly fire incidents were minimal. The contrast with Sicily was stark. There, 23 aircraft out of 144 had been shot down by Allied guns, a 16% loss rate from friendly fire alone. Historians later calculated that invasion stripes probably saved 500 or more aircraft from friendly fire during June 1944. 500 aircraft, each carrying crew members, each representing millions of dollars in equipment, each contributing to air superiority over the beaches. The stripes didn't just save planes. They saved lives, maintained combat effectiveness, and ensured Allied air power could be applied where needed most. The psychological impact on German forces was significant. Prisoners captured after D-Day consistently reported feeling overwhelmed by Allied air presence. They described the sky as filled with aircraft, endless waves, constant attacks, no respite. The visual impact of thousands of striped aircraft reinforced the sense that Germany faced an enemy with unlimited resources. One German officer captured near can in late June told his interrogators about watching the invasion from a concrete bunker. For 3 hours after dawn, he said, there was not a single moment when I couldn't see Allied aircraft overhead. They appeared in formations of 30, 40, 50 planes, all marked with black and white stripes, all clearly friendly to each other, all clearly deadly to us. I knew at that moment we had lost the war. The success of invasion stripes influenced military planning for decades. During the Korean War, United Nations aircraft used similar markings during major operations. In the 1956 Suez Crisis, British and French aircraft were painted with black and yellow stripes. The principle remained the same. Simple visual markings applied uniformly could prevent friendly fire more effectively than complex technology. Modern military forces use different systems. Electronic identification has improved dramatically since 1944. Radar technology, satellite communications, and sophisticated IFF systems can track thousands of aircraft simultaneously. But the fundamental problem remains. In the chaos of combat, when systems fail or communications break down, human beings must make split-second identification decisions. The temptation to solve that problem with paint and visual markings never entirely disappeared. In 1985, 41 years after D-Day, surviving veterans of the Normandy invasion gathered for a reunion in France. Among them were pilots who'd flown striped aircraft over the beaches, gunners who'd held their fire because they recognized the markings, paratroopers who'd jumped from transports that made it through because ships didn't fire. One veteran, a former anti-aircraft gunner on a destroyer, described his memory of D-Day. He'd been at his station since midnight. He'd watched the armada of transport planes pass overhead in darkness. He'd seen the black and white stripes even in the dark. His fingers had been on the trigger. His orders were clear. If the planes hadn't been striped, he would have fired. He would have killed American paratroopers. Instead, he held fire. The stripes saved lives, he said simply. Mine included. Because if I'd fired on our own planes, if I'd killed our own men, I couldn't have lived with that. The story of invasion stripes is ultimately about learning from failure. The tragedy over Sicily in July 1943 wasn't inevitable. It resulted from poor planning, inadequate training, and communication failures. 83 men died because those failures weren't corrected. But their deaths weren't meaningless. The investigation that followed identified specific problems. Solutions were developed. Procedures were changed. Technology was improved. The invasion stripes were only one element of that improvement. Training programs were expanded. Communication protocols were standardized. IFF systems were upgraded. Fire discipline was emphasized at every level. But the stripes were the most visible symbol of change. They represented a commitment that another Sicily wouldn't happen. That promise was kept. Major General Matthew Ridgway, who'd watched his paratroopers die over Sicily, lived to see the invasion of Normandy succeed without similar losses. In his memoirs written decades later, he reflected on the lessons of that terrible night in July 1943. The deplorable loss of life could have been prevented, he wrote. But once it occurred, we had a choice. We could accept it as inevitable, as the price of war, as unavoidable tragedy. Or we could learn from it. We could identify what went wrong. We could fix the problems. We could ensure it never happened again. We chose to learn. We chose to fix the problems. The invasion stripes were part of that fix. They weren't a perfect solution. They didn't prevent every friendly fire incident. But they prevented hundreds. They saved lives. They contributed to the success of the largest military operation in history. That is their legacy. The ground crews who painted the stripes, working through the nights of June 3rd and 4th, 1944, didn't know they were making history. They were following orders, mixing paint, applying brushes to aluminum, masking off roundels, checking measurements. The work was tedious, physically demanding, performed under extreme time pressure. Many probably wondered if it was necessary, whether simple paint could really make a difference. The pilots who flew striped aircraft on D-Day knew the answer. Captain Bud Anderson, who'd been so surprised by the boldness of the markings, flew his striped P-51 Mustang on the longest mission of his life. He provided air cover over the beaches for hours. He flew low enough to see landing craft approaching shore. He was within range of dozens of ships equipped with anti-aircraft guns. Not one fired at him. "The stripes worked," he said in a post-war interview. "I knew they worked when I flew over that fleet and nobody shot at me. Those stripes saved my life." Thousands of other pilots could have said the same. Thousands of aircrew members owed their survival to ground crews they never met, who painted stripes they initially thought excessive. Thousands of soldiers on beaches looked up at striped aircraft and knew they had support. The impact rippled through every level of the operation. When the last invasion stripes were removed in December 1944, when aircraft returned to standard markings, when the black and white paint faded from history into memory, the lesson remained. Simple solutions to complex problems, learning from failure, protecting your own forces as carefully as you attack the enemy. These principles didn't begin with invasion stripes. They didn't end with them. But the stripes provided a perfect example of their application. They showed what could be accomplished when military organizations commit to solving problems rather than accepting casualties. The true importance of those simple black and white bands lies not in their visual impact. It lies in the lives they saved, in the lesson they taught, in the proof they provided that learning from tragedy can prevent its repetition. That is why pilots painted stripes on wings. Not for identification alone, not for tactical advantage, but because 81 men died over Sicily and their deaths demanded meaning. The stripes gave those deaths meaning. They transformed tragedy into prevention. They turned failure into success. They saved 500 aircraft and thousands of lives. They showed that sometimes the difference between catastrophe and triumph is nothing more than black paint, white paint, and the determination to learn from the past.